Good evening all and welcome. Tonight I have a chilling collection of scary stories from under the bed. So get comfortable, grab your blankets, and let the darkness take control. This happened when I was 19 and barely out of high school, and still figuring out what being an adult meant. I had just moved into my first apartment, a small 2-room unit in an old converted house on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The building had that creepy Victorian charm, creaky floorboards, high ceilings, and a long, echoey hallway that led to the apartments on the first floor. Mine was at the end, apartment 1D. No neighbors on either side. It was early fall, and the evenings were getting dark faster, but it was still warm enough to keep the windows open. I was in the middle of unpacking the last few boxes when I realized I hadn't checked the mail. The main door to the building locked automatically when shut, but my apartment door, old and slightly warped, needed to be locked manually with a key. I remember thinking, I'll only be a minute. I grabbed my phone and stepped out to the mailbox near the front entrance, still on the phone with my boyfriend Aaron. I remember laughing about something dumb he'd said as I sorted through the junk mail, fidgeting with envelopes. Everything felt normal, completely ordinary. I came back inside, shut the heavy apartment door behind me, and kicked off my shoes. I then sank onto my bed and opened the mail with one hand while still holding my phone to my ear. Then, I dropped it clumsily. It slipped from my fingers, bounced once, and slid just out of reach, halfway under the bed. I stuck my arm down to try and grab it, not looking yet, but after getting nothing, I decided to put my face down in order to see where it was. And that's when I saw something in the shadows. A hand. It was pale and filthy, fingernails black with grime. It was attached to an arm. I froze. Inches away from my face was some unknown person lying under my bed. At first I couldn't even process it. He wasn't moving. He was curled up in the back near the crawl space, his back to me, knees tucked to his chest. I could see the rise and fall in his breathing. I didn't scream, and I don't know how I stayed silent. Instinct took over. I grabbed my phone and pretended nothing was wrong and said, "Oh, sorry, dropped my phone. I'm going to take a shower real quick and call you back." I stood up slowly, legs shaking, and walked to the bathroom, which was barely 5 steps from the bed. I closed the door, locked it, and turned on the shower full blast, and opened the window. Thank God it was a first-floor apartment. I kicked out the screen and climbed through, barefoot, heart pounding in my throat. And once I hit the soft, wet grass, I bolted across the street, crouched behind a car and called the police. My voice cracked as I explained what happened. "Stay where you are. We're dispatching units now. Do not go back inside," were the instructions given to me by the police. I called Aaron next. He was already driving over, and I kept staring at the glowing window off my bathroom across the street. I remember the moment it hit me. He doesn't know I left. And I saw movement behind the curtains, a shadow pacing back and forth. That's when Aaron arrived and pulled me into an embrace. A minute or two later, squad cars pulled up. I gave them my key, and 3 officers entered. I stared at the door, breath held. And then 2 officers emerged, gripping a man between them. He didn't struggle. He just walked stiffly, with mild, unblinking eyes. His hair was long and matted, and he looked impossibly thin, like he'd been starving. And the worst part? As our eyes locked, he gave me a smile. The officer next to me gripped my shoulder gently. He was standing at the bathroom door with a knife from your kitchen. I burst into tears right then. I couldn't help it. Later, the police told me the man had likely slipped inside while I was checking the mail. My apartment door must have not latched completely, and he'd been watching me, hiding in the apartment while I walked around unpacking. He must have crawled under the bed the moment I stepped out the room. They say he was homeless, delusional, and probably mentally ill. He didn't say a word the whole time they questioned him, and just stared at the wall. I think they sent him to a psychiatric facility, but I'm not really sure what happened to him after that. That day, Aaron moved in with me, because I really found it hard to sleep for weeks. And every time I walk into a room, I always check under the bed, the closet, and behind the shower curtain, because I had no idea he was there, and I never want to get that kind of surprise in my life again. When I was 9, my family moved into a weather-worn old house. It sat on a stretch of rural road with skeletal trees crowding from every side. We were told it was built in 1953, though even that felt generous. The paint was flaking off like sunburnt skin, and the porch groaned like it didn't want us there. My dad, being a contractor, said it was nothing a few weeks of work couldn't fix. He patched the roof, replaced the cracked windows, even redid the plumbing. It looked better by the time we moved in. It looked fine, but it didn't feel fine. My bedroom was upstairs at the end of a narrow hallway, with warped wood flooring that croaked beneath your feet. My room was bigger than I was used to, bigger than it really needed to be. The walls smelt like mildew, like rain had once lived in them, and there was a walk-in closet to the right, and inside that, a door the size of a doghouse that led to a crawl space. Across from that, built directly into the wall, was a strange arched door that led straight into the attic. I hated that door. It didn't have a proper lock. It opened inward. When I was cleaning out the attic during the first week, I found nothing but cobwebs, a busted lamp, and this is what stuck with me. 4 baby doll heads. Just doll heads, all of them cracked and hollow, as if something had chewed through the necks and left the rest behind. I told my mum, and she just assumed it was probably some kid's old toy. But the heads weren't old. The plastic was still pink and sticky like they'd been handled recently. I tried to forget about it, and I slept with the lights on. By the end of the first year, I stopped feeling alone in that room. It started with small things, the sense that someone was standing behind me while I brushed my teeth, the feeling of being watched while I changed. I tried to blame it on the wind or the old pipes, but it grew. The silence got heavier, and one night while I was lying on my stomach watching river monsters eating stale tortilla chips straight out the bag, my hair had fallen over my face, and that's when I felt it. A finger touched the back of my head. Just one. It was slow and firm, like someone testing the weight of my skull. I felt the nail, slightly jagged, drag along my scalp before pulling away. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't scream, I couldn't. I just ran. Straight down the stairs, bowl of salsa in hand. My mum was doing laundry. I tried to explain, babbling through tears. She went upstairs, prayed in my room like she had done once before when we lived in a house with bats in the attic, and I stayed down the rest of the night. For a while, I started sleeping without a pillow right in the center of the bed. I told myself that if I didn't sleep too close to the edge, nothing could reach me. I stopped closing the closet door, and I always draped a towel over the attic knob, so I'd know if it moved. But then it got worse. A few months later, I was sitting on the edge of my bed watching Phineas and Ferb, laughing at something I don't quite remember, when suddenly the entire bed lurched. It didn't shake like a quake or someone bumping it. It slammed against the floor like something had grabbed the frame and was trying to lift it. I flew back, gasping, clutching the blanket like I would do something. I told my mum again, and she prayed again. Nothing changed. A week later, I was alone again. This time I was watching Shake It Up. The remote was sitting in the center of the bed, and I was too lazy to crawl over, so I reached. And that's when I heard a hiss, like steam escaping from a pipe, but lower, animalistic and angry. I froze and pulled back my hand and waited, and when I reached again there was another sharp hiss. I was shaking by the third time, my fingers hovering inches from the remote. When I reached again, the sound exploded, long and vengeful, like it hated me for trying. I ran out again, nearly falling down the stairs. My mum met me at the landing. She didn't even ask. She just led me to the couch and began praying. My dad, who'd been watching football in the garage, said maybe it was airplanes. We had them flying overhead all the time. But this didn't hum, it hissed, and I knew when I was reaching. Years later, I brought it up to my mum again. I'm 17 now, and she told me something I still haven't fully processed. She said one morning after I left for school, she went to tidy my room. She was picking up laundry when she saw movement through the window. A girl of maybe 8 or 9 was walking in slow circles in our backyard, barefoot, wearing a white shirt and humming. Now our backyard was fenced in and locked and no one had been left inside. When she went out to ask who she was, the yard was empty. No footprints in the mud, no sound, nothing. My dad told her not to tell me. He was the one who made up the airplane theory. He didn't want me afraid, but I already was, and I still am. This happened a while ago, and I still have nightmares about it. When I was 22, I was backpacking alone across Eastern Europe after university. I had this romantic idea of trains, old cities, snow, and quiet reflection. I was halfway through Western Ukraine when it happened. I had been staying in little villages, hopping from one train station to another, meeting locals, eating borscht with strangers, and I was on my way to visit a friend's cousin in Lviv, but I had to transfer trains to some forgotten outpost of a village. The station wasn't even a proper station, just cracked wooden platform and a sagging bench, and a hut that looked like it hadn't seen a soul in years. No light, no sound, except the wind blowing through the branches of dead trees, like nature was giving a sigh of despair. It was already dusk and snow was falling hard. There were no other travelers, no station attendant, just me. I waited for over an hour, my fingers frozen, my breath clouding the air when I noticed someone standing down the road. An old woman, bundled in layers of shawls and heavy boots. She walked towards me at a painfully slow pace, almost dragging her feet, and she asked in a heavily accented Ukrainian if I was waiting for the late train to Lviv. I nodded, and she said there was no train until morning, and to come home with her, that she'd feed me and that her house was warm. I hesitated, but I was freezing. I was alone, and she seemed kind enough. Lodging with locals wasn't unheard of, and I was honestly exhausted. I followed her down a snow-packed trail into the trees. We walked for over an hour, probably because she was going so slow herself. The forest grew thicker, darker, and the snow deeper. I started to badly regret it, but I told myself to calm down. She was just a sweet old woman trying to help a stranger. Probably. Eventually, we reached her house. It looked abandoned. A crooked, 2-story wooden cabin in the middle of the woods. Shutters hanging loose, windows opaque with frost. She let me in, lit some lamps, and warmed up a bowl of soup, beetroot and something else I couldn't place. Only when she sat across from me in the yellow glow did I realize something was off about her. Her face was wrong. The skin beneath the kerchief was rough, like a poorly applied disguise. Her hands, too, were massive, knotted and masculine, and her eyes, when they met mine, were cold, like she was eyeing up prey. She said I'd sleep upstairs, and I followed her up the narrow staircase to a tiny room with a single bed and a nailed-shut window. No furniture, just a bed and a hook on the wall. She closed the door behind me and then locked it. I called out but received no answer. At first, I thought she'd done it by mistake, but something in my gut twisted hard. I tried the window, sealed tight, no latch. I was trapped. Trying to calm myself, I set the bag down, and that's when I realized I needed to pee. There was no bathroom, so I got on my hands and knees and started feeling around the bed, hoping for a chamber pot. But instead, my fingers brushed against something soft. Clothes. Cold skin. I froze. I leaned down slowly, and my eyes adjusted to the dark space beneath the bed. There was a body. A young woman, pale and unmoving, her eyes wide open and lifeless. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't breathe. I got up, pulled the body out from under the bed with shaking hands, and placed it on top of the mattress and covered it with the blanket. Then I crawled under the bed myself and waited, heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. Minutes dragged like hours. Then footsteps, slow and deliberate. The lock clicked. The door creaked open, and the woman, or a man, walked in. I could only see their boots from where I lay. They stood at the foot of the bed for a moment, and then without a word lifted something heavy. The sound was worse than anything I'd ever heard. Crack, crunch, thud. Over and over, hitting the girl on the bed who was already dead. Blood hit the floor. Some of it splattered down through the gaps in the mattress and touched my face. Then silence. The figure dropped the crowbar inches from my face and left. It took me what felt like hours to even move. I grabbed the crowbar and began to pry the window open, millimeter by agonizing millimeter. I didn't care about the sound anymore, I just needed out. When the window finally gave way, I threw my bag out and jumped, landing hard in the snow. I didn't look back. I ran through the trees, through the dark, and until I saw headlights, a road, trucks, and I flagged one of them down and begged them to take me anywhere. I never went to the police. This was in a remote part of Ukraine, and I was terrified that even reporting it might somehow put me in danger. But I never forgot of the body under the bed, or the eyes of the person who took me there. I still wonder, was the house theirs? And what of the poor girl? Had she been a traveler like me, who had been lulled in by a false sense of security, and then murdered? I wish I had the answers, but I don't. Just this story, and a memory I'll never forget. This happened to my mum years before I was born. She was in her early 20s then, living in a share house in Geraldtown, a coastal town north of Perth in Western Australia. Back then it was quieter, full of salt-crusted utes and blokes who worked on boats or in the canning sheds. Mum worked nights at the Crayport Tavern, a pub close to the marina that catered mostly to fishermen, deckhands, and the occasional wandering backpacker. She knew most of the regulars by name, the sea-weathered, rough-spoken kind who drank heavy and paid cash. One of the guys who stumbled in was called Darren Ward. He was lanky, pale, and always looked slightly wet. She'd seen him at some house parties, always lingering too close or talking too much. He started turning up at the pub late in the evenings. He never drank much, just a pint, staring at her from the end of the bar. There'd be times when he tried to chat her up between orders, asking where she lived, if she walked home alone, etc. She always brushed him off, apologizing and moving on. He nodded like he understood, but he never really left. That night, her shift ended just past midnight. It had been a slow Thursday, mist in the air and the streets empty, except for the odd drunken straggler. She didn't drive back then, so she walked the 3 kilometers home. She said the streets were dead quiet, just the sound of her boots on gravel and the distant crashing of waves rolling in. She never heard a footstep behind her. She didn't see anyone. There was nothing. Her house was a creaky old fibro rental, with 3 blokes she trusted like brothers. Big drinkers, big hearts. She got in quietly, lights off, boots off at the door. Everyone else was already asleep. She headed straight for the shower, to clean off the sweat, cigarette smoke and stale beer, wanting nothing more than to rinse the night away. She towel-dried her hair, still damp, and padded barefoot down the hallway to her room. That's when she first noticed something off. Her bedroom door was open. She always kept it shut. Always. Even her housemates knew that. But it was cracked open, just enough for the darkness to spill out onto the hallway. She told herself it might have been the wind. Perhaps she'd just forgotten, or maybe one of the boys had knocked it by accident. So she stepped inside, closed the door and sat on the edge of her bed. But something was wrong. She said it felt like her body knew it before her mind did. Her skin prickled. She couldn't hear anything. She didn't know why she did it. To this day she still can't explain it. But something inside her told her to look underneath the bed. She didn't drop to her knees. She just leaned sideways slowly, one eye peeking under the bed frame. And there he was. Darren, curled in on himself like a spider, his eyes wide open and locked on hers. He didn't appear to be breathing or blinking, and for a second, she swears it felt like forever. She thought he was dead. She didn't scream nor panic. She stood up slowly, walked calmly down the hall and knocked on Jake's door, her housemate. When he opened it groggy and shirtless, she said, "I think there's a dead bloke under the bed." That got his attention. He grabbed the aluminium bat he kept by the door. Steve and Ryan, the other 2, came out when they heard the noise, and they stormed into her room together. But Darren was no longer under the bed. They found him halfway through her window, trying to scramble out in silence. He wasn't dead. He was waiting and hiding for God knows how long. He bolted. They chased him, but he was fast, so they called the police, who picked him up the next day. He hadn't even bothered to hide. The cops knew him, and for his actions, all he got was a fine and a warning to leave town. Mum says the worst part wasn't seeing him under the bed. It wasn't the eerie silence or the way he looked up and down at her like she was a slab of meat on a butcher's hook. It was knowing he had been in the house before. She found out later her housemates had heard noises the week before. They thought it was something else. She wonders what would have happened if she hadn't have looked under the bed, if she'd turned out the light and fallen asleep, if she'd brought someone home with her, if she hadn't. To this day, she won't sleep without checking under the bed, won't leave a window open, and lives inland now. She says she can still feel the weight of his stare when the house gets too quiet. And I think the worst part is the damaging effect it had on my mum. I hope one day she finds peace, and that the creep, Darren, got his just desserts. I was about 8 when this happened. It was a hot summer night. The ceiling fan was on in my parents' room, as was the TV. They were half watching some sitcom I didn't understand, and I was restless, sweaty, and barefoot on the wooden floor. I was playing a game by myself. That night I was wrapped in one of the spare sheets, pretending I was a mummy or worm or something. But part of the game was always the same. I'd roll under the bed and stay there, quiet like I was hiding from something. I liked the feeling of being under things, wrapped up safe, like nothing could get to me if I couldn't see it. The sheet was tucked around me. I was lying there staring up at the wooden slats that held up the mattress above. I reached up with both hands, pressing on the wood, straightening out the sheet so that it wouldn't bunch or tear on the dusty floorboards. And that's when I heard a hiss, not the playful sound a cat makes, not even a warning. It was wet and guttural right next to my face. And before I could move, Something slashed through the sheets twice, fast and clean. I saw it happen. 2 sets of claws, one on each side of my hands, ripping the fabric just inches from my skin. I screamed. The sheet twisted around me as I rolled out from under the bed, tumbling across the floor. I was crying before I even stood up. My parents jumped, my mum turned off the TV and asked what the hell was going on. And I pointed, shaking, that there was a cat under the bed. They exchanged a look that I'll never forget, like they were trying to suppress a laugh. My dad said, "We don't have a cat," and that I must be dreaming, and that maybe I scratched myself on a spring or a nail. But I hadn't. I felt it. I kept crying, yelling there was something underneath, something dark that hissed at me. And finally, just to prove me wrong, they moved to the bed. But there was nothing underneath, just dust. But I know what I saw. There was something under there. But it wasn't just a cat. It was very dark. It was definitely cat-shaped, though. I'll never be quite sure. Just for context, by the way, after we thoroughly searched that room, and the door being closed the whole time, we found a whopping nothing. And for weeks after that, I wouldn't go near the bed alone, and began sleeping with the lights on. I wouldn't even let my feet dangle over the edge. Even now, 20 years later, I still think about it sometimes, especially when I hear hissing in the dark, or something dark from the corner of my eye. I was maybe 5 or 6 years old when this happened. Still young enough to believe in monsters, but old enough to start suspecting they might not be imaginary. The memory has never left me, and to this day I'm still not sure if it was real or one of those night terrors that feel stitched into your memory. But if it was a dream, then it was a kind of dream that crawled out of Dreamworld and left claw marks on the floor. It was some time after midnight. Everyone else in the house was asleep. My siblings tucked away in their beds, my parents long gone to their own dreams. But I, of course, was awake as usual. I never slept easy as a child. My mind was always too loud, too busy conjuring stories or drifting off with whatever book I had tucked under my pillow. That night, it was a Sesame Street book, one which had Grover on the cover. I loved that book more than anything, even though it was worn and dog-eared from reading it 100 times. I was up on the bottom bunk of the old wooden bunk bed I shared with my brother. He snored softly above me, oblivious. I read by moonlight, no flashlight, just the dim, silver glow coming through the windows to light the pages. But the air in the room began to change. It started with a chill, as if the temperature had dropped 5 degrees in a breath. I hadn't even noticed it creeping in, but suddenly my fingers were cold and stiff, and the tip of my nose burned slightly from the frost. I paused, shivering, and pulled my quilt higher up to my chin. My book slipped out my lap and disappeared into the narrow crack beneath the bed and wall. I frowned. Grover had just been getting to the best part. I leaned over and reached into the dark to grab the book. My fingers brushed the cardboard cover, and then something pulled back. It was subtle at first, gentle, like someone else's hand was on the other end teasing. I tugged harder. It tugged back. I froze. My first thought wasn't fear, not immediately. It was confusion. I tried again, a bit more urgently now, and whatever it was yanked hard. I didn't scream, I couldn't. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. The cold had sunk deeper now, threading through the mattress and into my chest. I stared at the shadows under my bed, my pulse thundering behind my eyes. And then I saw it. A hand, just for a second, greyish, too long. The fingers curved like old branches and ended in filthy yellowed nails. And in an instant it was gone, vanishing back under the bed like it had never been there at all. But I'd seen it. I didn't move, I couldn't even blink. All I could think about were the bedtime stories, the scary ones I was told not to believe in, goblins and witches, and things that lived under beds and waited for small, curious hands. This was one of those moments where the child in you realizes suddenly and completely that some stories might not be stories. I released my hold on the book. It fell to the hardwood floor with a thud, and immediately I heard it. A low scraping sound like nails being dragged along the wood. It shifted and slithered beneath the bed, and I felt the mattress dip slightly, as if something heavy was pressing against the frame from below. I turned my eyes towards my sister across the room. She was a mound under the covers, unmoving, peaceful and oblivious. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even breathe too loudly. I lay there paralyzed, staring at the ceiling and waiting for something, anything, to reach out again. But it didn't. In the morning, daylight chased the fear away, just enough for me to crawl down and look under the bed, trying to laugh it off, trying to believe it had just been a nightmare. My book was gone. I checked every corner, every inch of space under the bed. But I did find something else. A long, deep gouge in the hardwood floor, right where the book had dropped, like something had dragged a knife across the boards in a perfect arc. I never told my parents. I don't know why. Probably because I thought they wouldn't believe me, and maybe I was scared if they would. For years after, I refused to read in bed. I built a nest of pillows and blankets in my closet, shut the door and turned on a lamp, and told myself I was cozy, but I knew better. I just didn't want anything else reaching for me in the dark. This happened in January, in a town called South Haven. Nothing ever happens here. My name's Mariah, and I used to live on the last paved road before the tree lines took over like a disease. If you looked out my bedroom window, all you saw were trees, and the warped silhouette of the barn my father never finished. I was 17. My room was technically the second floor, but really it was the top half of the old farmhouse attic, converted decades ago and badly. The walls leaned in like they were listening, and there was only one window, a crooked thing that didn't quite shut, and during the winter, wind crawled through the frame like a ghost. The floor slanted towards the closet, nothing ever stayed level. That room made you feel off-kilter even when everything was fine. My bed was a rusted iron twin with peeling white paint and a spine-killing mattress that groaned like a dying animal if you turned too quickly. Mum found it at a church sale, said it had character, and that was her word for anything old and ruined that she didn't want to replace. I thought it looked like something a Victorian orphan would die in. I was sick of that place, sick of the cold, and sick of the way the baseboard heater ticked like it was counting down my doom. The nights dragged, endlessly and heavy. I went to bed late one night, just after midnight. I'd been restless all day, but I'd settled into something deeper than nerves, an itching tension I couldn't name. I curled up under 3 layers of blankets, the heavy red quilt that smelled like cedar and mothballs, the ratty old comforter with cigarette burns from when Dad still lived there, and a scratchy army surplus throw. I remember trying to burrow down into them like the weight could keep the unease out. Sleep didn't come easy, and when it did, it came in pieces. I kept waking up, freezing, no matter how many times I pulled the quilt back up. It always ended up around my knees. I told myself I must be kicking it off in my sleep. I even laughed at myself the 3rd time. It must have been around 2:30 a.m. when I woke up again. The room felt cold, but there was something else, an unnerving presence in the air. I opened my eyes and saw frost on my window, and my breath hung in the air. I didn't move right away. I just stared at the ceiling listening. Not for any noise in particular, just waiting to hear something that would make me feel less alone. I remember trying to convince myself that I should probably get the quilt again, so that I could go back to sleep. And when I reached down, half asleep to try and grab it. It didn't move. It was caught on something, maybe the bed frame. I tugged again, and it felt like something pulled back. My blood went cold. That phrase is cliché, I know, but I swear to God it felt like someone poured ice water straight into my heart. Every part of me froze. My hand clutched the top corner of the quilt, and I couldn't even make myself let go. My eyes flicked towards the edge of the mattress, and there was a face. A pale, slack, waiting face, not fully visible, just the upper edge, just enough to see the eyes, wide and bloodshot, staring up at me. He wasn't breathing hard, he wasn't moving, just staring. A hand gripped the other end of my quilt. I remember the silence, the pure, thick quiet. Not even the tick of the heater anymore, just the sound of me not trying to scream. I thought to myself, if I scream, he'll move. And if he moves, I'll die. I didn't run for the door. I don't know why. Maybe because the door was on the other side of the bed. Maybe because I knew I wouldn't make it. I went for the window. In one motion, I threw the covers at him, hoping to confuse him, and lunged for the crooked window. It screeched as I shoved it open, and my fingers slipped on the cold glass. I remember the sound of it, like the window was screaming for me, and I dove. I hit the roof over the porch, rolled, and landed hard on the frozen ground. My ankle folded sideways, and I heard something crack, but I didn't stop. I crawled and stumbled and ran barefoot through the snow to the neighbor's place. Mr. Ingram opened the door with a shotgun in hand, and I collapsed into him sobbing. I couldn't even talk. He called the police. They searched the house, found the window still open, and found the quilt on the floor, as well as beer cans, a half-eaten protein bar, and a strip of fabric that had come off one of my hoodies, the one I thought I'd lost in the wash. But the worst part, a folding knife under the bed. He'd been there before, maybe not every night, perhaps not under the bed every time, but he'd been in that room, under me while I slept. The worst part, they never caught him. No fingerprints, no DNA, no footprints in the snow. It was like he was never there at all. And I think that's the worst part. I was about 5 years old when this happened. Just a kid on the edge of a big change. My family was moving. We were leaving the cramped little rental home where the walls always smelled like mildew. I should have been thrilled. My parents had promised me my own room in the new house. No more bottom bunk, no more creaking ceiling above me when my sister rolled over in the night. That last night in our old house, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't nerves, it was something else. Something I couldn't explain even now, nearly 2 decades later. The memory never faded. If anything, it sharpened with age. So let me take you back. I lie awake on the bottom bunk. My sister asleep above me, her breathing slow and steady. She didn't snore, she never did, but I could always hear her mattress move whenever she turned. At the foot of my bed sat my favorite toy, a plush white kitten that meowed, purred, blinked its glassy blue eyes, and kneaded the air with its tiny mechanical paws when squeezed. I couldn't remember where it came from. It felt like it had always been with me. So I was clutching at the kitten as I lay there, its soft body a small comfort. That's when I heard a faint shuffle. It came from the edge of the bed, down near my feet. I sat up and whispered, "Sid?" My cat's name, thinking maybe he'd come to say goodbye to the old house in his own feline way. But of course there was no reply. No padded paws, no gentle weight pressing down on the blanket, no purring. Then from beneath the covers I felt it, a light pressure. Fingers. I froze, not even daring to breathe. I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the blanket had bunched up. Maybe I'd shifted without realizing, but then it moved. The shape was wrong. It wasn't the rounded arch of a cat's back or the soft warmth of fur. It was a black twisting mass, a hand made of smoke and bone, with too many knuckles and nails like broken glass, creeping higher up my leg. I must have squeezed my kitten toy too tightly because it let out a mechanical purr, and that's when the hand stopped. Then very gently, the thing reached out and wrapped itself around the tail of the kitten. I didn't move, and it pulled. Not all at once, but slowly, almost thoughtfully. It dragged the toy towards the edge of the bed inch by inch, until it slipped off the side and hit the floor with a muffled thud. I heard it being dragged, slowly, across the floorboards, and vanishing beneath the bed. I didn't sleep. I lay there staring wide-eyed at the underside of the top bunk, every nerve in my body burning. Eventually I must have drifted off into some shallow, nightmarish slumber. And when morning came like a slap in the face, with the sun through the window, I sat up, heart racing, and leaned over the bed to find my kitten. But it wasn't there. Later, as we packed up and loaded the moving truck, I begged my parents to help me find it. I checked every corner, every closet, every box. Nothing. My mum brushed it off. My sister barely looked up. My brother told me to stop being dramatic. But I know where it had gone. I saw it vanish, and no one believed me. Eventually, the day took over, and we left that house behind. Years passed, and by the time I was 12, I barely remembered the white kitten. It had become one of those foggy memories, until we came back. The family we'd rented the house to had moved out, and we came back to clean. My parents were outside tidying up the yard. My brother was in the basement, and I was left alone on the main floor. I saved my old room for last. I don't know why, but I did. The door creaked open when I pushed it. There was nothing unusual at first, just an empty, sun-faded room. The carpet was stained in the corner, and the closet door hung slightly off its hinges. I was about to grab the vacuum when I saw it. There, exactly where my bunk bed used to be, was a small, filthy lump of white fur. I stared at it confused, and took a few cautious steps forward. It was the kitten toy. The same one. Its fur was matted and yellowed in places. One of its ears had been torn off, and it was coated in a thin film of ash-colored dust, like it had been hidden in the fireplace for years. I leaned down, reaching for it by the inner ear, intending to toss it straight into the trash, and it purred. The soft, broken purr of a motor that hadn't been used in years. Its little paws began to knead the air, and I dropped it straight in the trash bag and stumbled out the room, gasping for air. I couldn't even cry. I was so confused. The toy kept meowing like it was calling for me. My mother came in when she heard it, and when she found the toy on the floor, thank God she threw it out herself. I didn't tell her what I'd seen when I was 5, I didn't have to. The look on her face meant she understood something was wrong. I never saw the kitten again, but I do remember the feel of the hand on my blanket. I remember how it knew I was awake, and I remember that it didn't want me, but the toy. And for some reason that makes it even worse. I was 24 when it happened. My husband David had just left for his annual National Guard training 2 weeks in Fort Drum, New York. I stayed behind in our rented craftsman-style house in South Buffalo with our 5-year-old daughter Ellie, and our dog, a lanky mutt called Juniper. I was enrolled in an online certificate program for medical coding, trying to get us out of the paycheck-to-paycheck hole. Classes ran from 6 to 10 p.m. on weeknights, which meant most of my evenings were spent at the upstairs desk, earbuds in, staring at spreadsheets. That Friday was supposed to be routine. My mother offered to keep Ellie for the weekend to give me the rest of the time to study. I drove her across town to East Aurora, dropped her off with her favorite blanket and half the contents of her bedroom in an overnight bag, then came back to a quiet, empty house. It was early spring, and snow still lingered in the shadows of the gutters and chain-link fences. Everything was wet and brown, and I remembered that when I got back, because I noticed a trail of muddy shoe prints on our side steps, tracking all the way up the back door. At first, I thought it was the mailman or a neighborhood kid. Nothing was broken, and nothing looked forced. I should have called someone. Instead, I wiped the handprints away with an old towel and forgot about it. That night, I made myself a grilled cheese, fed Juniper, and started class upstairs. It was around 8:30 when I noticed her ears twitching. She'd left her head, growl, and lay back down, tail thumping nervously. The house creaked more than usual. I muted the lecture and listened, but I could barely make anything out. Then there was a soft pacing on hardwood, but I wasn't sure if I was imagining it. So just to be safe, I texted my mum, "Hey, I think I hear someone downstairs. Could just be wind or June." She replied not long after, saying to be safe and to lock the doors and to call her if I felt afraid. I locked everything, deadbolts, windows, even the tiny bathroom latch upstairs, like that was going to stop someone. But still I couldn't shake the tight, nauseating feeling in my chest. You know, when your body knows something before your brain is willing to admit it. At 10, class ended. I shut my laptop, turned off the light, and sat in the dark for a bit just listening. The silence pressed in hard, broken only by Juniper's low, huffing sigh. I went downstairs and called my mum like I always did. She told me Ellie had fallen asleep with her bear tucked under her chin. We were talking about stupid things, neighbors, groceries, some show she wanted me to watch when I caught myself drifting towards Ellie's room. I don't know why. Her door then creaked open slowly, and I peeked in. The room was dark. The only light came from the hallway behind me. Her twin bed sat flush against the far wall, raised on a metal frame, and the slats underneath were open, easy to see beneath. That's when I saw the man, pressed flat near the floor, face turned towards me, eyes wide, not blinking. He didn't move, and neither did I. My voice died in my throat. I couldn't scream, I couldn't even breathe. The phone was still to my ear, and I heard my mother saying, "Hello? You still there?" Like she was 1,000 miles away. I backed out slowly, shut the door and locked it, though I don't know why. I whispered into the phone, "Mum, there's someone under Ellie's bed." The scream on the other end was loud enough that I flinched. She hung up and called my brother, who called 911. I grabbed Juniper's collar, bolted outside in socks and a hoodie, and waited in the driveway, shaking so hard I thought my knees would give out. Every second felt like a countdown to doom. The cops arrived fast. They were weirdly quick for this side of town, and they swept the house from top to bottom, but there was no one there. The back bathroom window was unlocked and cracked open. The screen was bent outward, slightly torn in one corner, and on the outside sill 2 muddy handprints. Inside more of the same across the floorboards, and faint smears like someone crawling. Then one officer, a guy with tired eyes and a tight mouth, said, "There's something else." He pointed his flashlight at the living room window, and there, smudged against the glass, were 2 palm prints, high up, wide. The kind you'd leave if you were slowly easing the window down, trying not to make noise. He said the prints were still fresh. I asked if they thought the guy had been living in the house. The officer didn't answer the question at first, and then just quietly said, "Maybe," or watching. Regardless, he knew your schedule and knew you were alone. I didn't sleep that night. When I finally brought Ellie home, she clung to me and asked, "Is the boy gone now?" "What boy?" I asked. "The one who knocks on my window at night." And the lady with no mouth. We had motion lights installed, cameras, new locks, and a security system with panic codes. But none of that made the house feel safer. Because the truth that no one likes to admit, locks are for peace of mind, but if someone wants in, they'll find a way in. And sometimes they're already inside. These events took place when I was between the ages of 11 and 16. As a young kid, I was always obsessed with the paranormal. At age 8, I was filling my time with shows like Creepy Canada and A Haunting. I also enjoyed reading stories online, and I had this weird attraction with creeping myself out. The story begins on a day where my buddy came over. We were 11 years old at the time and decided to rent the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. After this movie, I learnt that 3 a.m. was the devil's hour, and I ended up having nightmares for weeks. To say I was frightened would be an understatement. Soon after, I woke up in the middle of the night and decided to hide under my blankets and read a book. Someone or something punched me in the back of the head, and I sprinted up the stairs as fast as I could and refused to go back down. However, my father was convinced I was crazy and dragged me to bed against my will. I started noticing an odd trend. I was waking up at 2:59 every morning with no exceptions. From 3 to 4, I would hear whispers throughout my room. They would stop immediately at 4 a.m. There was also someone or something poking at my toes from over the edge of my covers, and once I got the nerve to peek at my toes, I would see the indent of a finger poking at them. At this point, I was so frightened, my parents agreed to let me move to the room upstairs. I felt like there was someone watching me 24/7, and I was perpetually on edge. I had also seen white apparitions about 10 to 20 times, but always looked away when I did. The toe poking and whispers persisted. I now had this entity punching from under the bed. When this would happen, I would run to bed with my mum, where this thing would resume poking my toes. There was even a moment I asked it to stop, and it did. I will mention I had major anxiety, and at the time, this was ruining my life. I slept maybe 4 to 5 hours a night, as I had the TV on between 3 and 4 a.m. At times when I was forced to stay home alone, I would wander the neighborhood by myself instead. Even while wandering the neighborhood, I had this persistent feeling like I was being followed, and the worst part was no one believed me. Around the age of 14, I read that showing an interest in the paranormal can act as an invitation for them to enter your life. I also read that these entities almost always target the youngest or weakest in the family, and I happened to check off all of those boxes. I slowly realized I needed to stop watching TV shows and researching. These events kept reoccurring, but to a smaller extent. However, just when I thought I was in the clear, things would pick back up again. When I was 15, we moved, partially because of this, and partially because my parents wanted me at a different high school. These events continued at the new house, but to a lesser extent. However, there were only 5 to 10 instances where I heard a voice scream my name from the basement, which only happened while I was home alone. Around 17, I had completely ignored everything paranormal, and finally felt like this entity no longer had a grip on my life. Odd tidbit, there were 2 instances, one at 20 and the other at 22, where I told this story to friends and came home to find some strange events. Is anyone familiar with this? I assume it was some kind of poltergeist who I welcomed into my life inadvertently. I'm sharing this with you now, as I brought it up with my parents recently and explained how difficult it was to go through this without them believing me, and it definitely had an impact on my current trust issues. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and I hope you enjoyed tonight's Under the Bed stories. It's not a topic I do very often, and these stories were in fact exclusive to members and patrons from last year. So I hope that you had a good time listening. I'm sorry there was no video on Tuesday, as there ought to have been. I had a bunch of stuff going on here at home, that made it very difficult to get anything done. Maintenance of various parts of the houses. Anyone who lives in a house should probably know. Just all seemed to pile on at once, and the silence you need to make a video just was unobtainable. So there we have it. Might do something special for Saturday to compensate. But yeah, sorry. I might do a week-long bonanza, maybe not next week, but the week after, as a little apology. But until then, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.